Captain Lee Taman pressed his back against the cold metal wall of the alien structure. His breathing was steady despite the chaos around him. The mission had gone wrong from the start. What was supposed to be a simple scouting operation on the planet Vextar had turned into a nightmare. The sound of clicking footsteps echoed through the corridor. The Cathari were getting closer. These alien creatures moved like giant insects, their long legs making sharp sounds on the metal floors. Taman had seen them before in battle footage, but being this close was different. They were tall, maybe 8 feet, with dark shells covering their bodies and 4 arms that moved in ways that made humans feel sick to watch. Taman checked his weapon. Only 3 shots left. Not enough to fight his way out of this place. He had been separated from his team when the Cathari attacked their landing site. Now he was alone in their facility, trying to gather intelligence about their operations. The clicking sounds stopped. Taman held his breath. Then he heard something worse than footsteps. It was a voice, speaking in broken human language. Human. Soldier, we know you are here. Surrender now and your death will be quick. Taman almost smiled. Death would be the easy way out. He knew what the Cathari really wanted. They had been capturing human soldiers for months, taking them to special facilities where they tried to break their minds. The aliens thought humans were weak mentally. They wanted to prove their superiority by destroying human prisoners from the inside. More voices joined the first one. They were surrounding his position. Taman could try to fight, but that would only delay the inevitable. Instead, he made a choice that surprised even himself. He stepped out into the open with his hands raised. "I surrender," he said clearly. 6. Cathari warriors immediately pointed their energy weapons at him. Their faces were hard to read, but Taman could sense their surprise. Most humans fought to the death rather than be captured. They probably thought he was afraid. One of them, wearing different colored armor, moved forward. This one was clearly the leader. When it spoke, its voice was like metal scraping against stone. "You choose wisdom over foolish bravery, human." "Perhaps. Your species is learning." Taman said nothing. He let them take his weapons and put restraints on his hands. The metal bands were uncomfortable but not painful. The Cathari wanted him alive and unharmed for whatever they had planned. They marched him through the facility. The walls were covered with strange symbols that hurt to look at. The air smelled like chemicals and something rotting. Taman tried to memorize the layout, but the corridors all looked the same. Everything was designed to confuse and disorient prisoners. They brought him to a large room with a high ceiling. In the center was a chair made of the same dark metal as the walls. It had straps and wires attached to it. Around the room were machines that hummed with energy. Taman recognized some of them from intelligence reports. This was a braking chamber. Standing near the chair was another Cathari, but this one was different. It wore robes instead of armor, and its shell had strange markings carved into it. When it looked at Taman, its eyes seemed to glow with a cold light. "I am Warcast Vestan," the robed alien said. Its human language was much better than the warriors. "I have broken the minds of 347 prisoners from 22 different species. You will be number 348. Taman met its gaze without flinching. "Maybe. Maybe not." Vestan made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your bravery is admirable but pointless. I have studied human psychology for years. Your species believes it is strong, but you are like children compared to us. We have been perfecting the art of mental destruction for thousands of years." They strapped Taman into the chair. The metal was cold against his skin. Wires were attached to his head and arms. He could feel electricity running through them, not enough to hurt, but enough to let him know the machines were working. "Before we begin," Vestan said, walking around the chair slowly, "you should understand what will happen to you. First, we will test your basic mental defenses. Most humans break during this phase. They start crying and begging for mercy." Taman closed his eyes and began the mental exercises Dr. Park So-young had taught him back on Earth. The Mental Fortress Protocol was designed specifically for situations like this. He built walls in his mind, compartments where he could hide his real thoughts and memories. "Phase 2 involves more advanced techniques," Vestan continued. We will show you images and sounds designed to drive you insane. We will make you relive your worst memories over and over. We will convince you that everyone you love is dead because of your failures." The machines around the room began to hum louder. Lights started flashing in patterns that made Taemin feel dizzy. But he kept building his mental fortress, brick by brick, just like he had practiced. "Phase 3 is where most prisoners lose themselves completely," Vexathon said with satisfaction. "We will rebuild your mind according to our design. You will become our servant, grateful for our mercy and eager to serve the Kethari Empire." Now the real torture began. Pain shot through Taemin's body like lightning. Images flashed in front of his eyes too fast to process. Sounds filled his head that made him want to scream. But he had expected this. The training had prepared him for pain and confusion. What Dr. Park So-young had taught him was that the human mind was not weak like other species thought. It was flexible. It could bend without breaking. It could adapt to almost anything. The key was not to fight the torture, but to flow around it like water flows around rocks. Vex then watched the monitors that showed Taemin's brain activity. After an hour of torture, the alien looked confused. The human's mind was not breaking, the way it should. Instead of collapsing, it seemed to be getting stronger. "Interesting," Vexthon muttered. "Your mental patterns are unusual. But this is only the beginning. We have weeks ahead of us, human. No one has ever resisted me for more than 5 days." Taemin opened his eyes and looked directly at the alien. Despite the pain coursing through his body, he smiled. "My name is Captain Lee Taemin," he said calmly. "And I think you're going to find humans are full of surprises." Vexthon's eyes narrowed. For the first time in years, the master interrogator felt a tiny seed of doubt. This human was not reacting like the others. There was something different about him, something that made Vexathon uncomfortable. "We shall see, Captain Lee Taemin," the alien said slowly. "We shall see." The machines continued their work through the night. But while Vexthon expected to see a broken human by morning, Taemin was using every moment to study his captors. He was learning their methods, their weaknesses, their fears. The Kethari thought they were breaking him. They had no idea that he was preparing to break them instead. As the hours passed, other aliens came to watch the interrogation. Word was spreading through the facility about the unusual human prisoner. Some came out of curiosity, others out of doubt. How could a simple human resist their advanced techniques? Taemin noticed their whispers and worried glances. Each sign of their uncertainty made him stronger. The mental fortress protocol was working exactly as designed. While his body suffered, his mind remained clear and focused. By dawn, Vexathon was frustrated and confused. The human should have been begging for mercy by now. Instead, he seemed almost relaxed despite the ongoing torture. "Tomorrow we will try different methods," Vexthon announced to his assistants. "This human has some training, but everyone breaks eventually." But as the alien left the chamber, Taemin could see the doubt in its movements. The first crack in their confidence had appeared, and that was exactly what he had been hoping for. 3 weeks had passed since Captain Lee Taemin's capture. The breaking chamber had become his second home. Every day brought new forms of torture, each one designed to destroy a different part of his mind. Vexthon had tried everything in the Kethari arsenal of psychological warfare. Neural disruptors that felt like ice picks in his brain. Memory scramblers that mixed his childhood with nightmare images. Fear inducers that showed him his worst terrors over and over again. Pain amplifiers that made every nerve in his body scream, but Taemin endured it all. The mental fortress protocol that Dr. Park So-young had developed was working better than anyone had hoped. The technique taught humans to create separate rooms in their minds. When torture attacked one room, they could retreat to another. The pain was still there, but it could not reach their core self. What made it even more effective was that Taemin was not just surviving the torture, he was studying it. Every technique the aliens used, he analyzed and memorized. Every pattern in their methods, he noted and filed away. He was turning their own facility into a school where he learned their weaknesses. During the interrogation sessions, Vexthon would ask him questions about human military positions, technology, and plans. Taman gave answers that were mostly false but sounded believable. But more importantly, he started asking his own questions. "Your torture methods are very advanced," Taman said during one session, his voice calm despite the electricity running through his body. "How long did it take your people to develop them?" Vestan seemed pleased by the question. The alien enjoyed talking about Cathari superiority. "We have perfected these techniques over 10,000 years of conquest. Every species we encounter adds to our knowledge." "Impressive," Taman said. "I notice you have a very organized society. Everyone has their place, their role. How does someone become a warcast like yourself?" The alien interrogator puffed up with pride. "The warcast is the highest honor. We are born to it, trained from birth to break minds and crush spirits. It is what makes us superior to lesser species like yours." Taman filed this information away. The aliens had a rigid caste system. They were born into their roles and could not change them. This was important. "What happens if someone from the warcast fails at their duties?" Taman asked innocently. For the first time, Vestan hesitated. "Failure is not acceptable, but it rarely happens. We do not fail." Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The aliens feared failure because it threatened their position in their rigid society. Taman began to understand their greatest weakness. As the days passed, more aliens came to observe the interrogations. A young one called Kevran seemed particularly interested. This alien was from a lower caste, probably learning from Vestan. Taman could see uncertainty in its movements. "You seem worried, Kevran," Taman said during one session, speaking directly to the young alien. Kevran jumped, surprised that the human knew its name. "I am not worried. You will break soon." "Of course I will," Taman agreed. "But it's taking longer than expected, isn't it? Much longer than your teachers said it would." The young alien glanced nervously at Vestan, who was adjusting one of the torture machines. "All species break eventually. You are no different." "You're right," Taman said. "But I'm curious about something. In your society, what happens to students who cannot learn their lessons properly? What happens to warcast trainees who cannot break a simple human?" Kevran's breathing became faster. Its shell-like skin began to change color slightly, which Taman had learned was a sign of stress in their species. "I will break you," Kevran said, but its voice shook. "I'm sure you will," Taman replied kindly. "But 3 weeks is a long time, isn't it? Other prisoners broke in days, maybe hours. But here I am, still talking to you, still asking questions, still unbroken." Vestan noticed the conversation and moved closer. "Do not speak to the prisoner unless instructed," it told Kevran sharply. But the damage was done. Taman had planted seeds of doubt in the young alien's mind. Over the following days, he watched those seeds grow. Kevran began making mistakes during procedures. Its movements became nervous and uncertain. Taman also began sharing stories during the torture sessions. He talked about human history, about how his species had overcome impossible odds again and again. He spoke of humans who had survived, years of captivity, who had endured pain that would kill other species, who had found ways to turn their suffering into strength. "We had a soldier named Kim Dong-wook," Taman said one day while electricity coursed through his body. "He was captured by rebels and tortured for 2 years. They used methods similar to yours. But instead of breaking, he studied his captors. He learned their language, their customs, their fears. When he finally escaped, he knew them better than they knew themselves." Vestan tried to ignore these stories, but Taman could see they were having an effect. The alien's confidence was not as solid as it had been at the beginning. "Another soldier, Yoon Hai-ri, was captured during a deep space mission," Taman continued. "Her captors tried to convince her that Earth had been destroyed, that all humans were dead. They showed her fake images, false reports. But she knew they were lying because they had made one mistake. They didn't understand human psychology well enough to make their lies believable." "Enough!" Vestan snapped. "Your stories prove nothing. Humans are weak." But its voice carried a note of desperation that had not been there before. Taman smiled. "Of course we're weak," he agreed. "That's what makes us strong. We know we can be broken, so we learn to bend instead. We know we can fail, so we plan for failure. We know we can be hurt, so we find ways to heal." He looked around the room at all the aliens watching. Your people have never learned to fail gracefully. You've never had to adapt or change. You've been so successful for so long that you've forgotten how to handle setbacks. The room fell silent except for the humming of machines. Every alien present was staring at Tae-min with expressions he was learning to read. Confusion, worry, doubt. "What are you trying to say, human?" Vestan asked slowly. "I'm saying that by failing to break me quickly, you've already failed," Tae-min replied calmly. "And in your society, failure has consequences, doesn't it?" Vestan's breathing became rapid and shallow. Around the room, other aliens began whispering among themselves. Tae-min could not understand their language, but their body language was clear. They were worried. That night, as the torture machines powered down for daily maintenance, Tae-min heard arguing in the corridor outside his cell. Voices were raised, in what sounded like panic. Someone was demanding explanations. Someone else was making excuses. Tae-min smiled in the darkness. Phase 1 of his counterattack was complete. He had introduced doubt into their ranks. Now it was time for Phase 2. The next morning, when Vestan arrived for the daily session, Tae-min could see the strain in the alien's movements. Its shell had lost some of its shine, and its eyes darted nervously around the room. "Today we try something different," Vestan announced, but its voice lacked its usual confidence. "Of course," Tae-min said pleasantly. "I'm looking forward to it. I've learned so much from your methods already. Dr. Park, so young, back on Earth, would be fascinated by your techniques. She's our leading expert on psychological warfare, you know." Vestan froze. "What did you say?" "Dr. Park, so young. She designed the training that prepared me for this. She specifically studied Cathari interrogation methods and developed countermeasures. I volunteered to test them in the field." Tae-min's smile grew wider. "I'm basically a walking experiment in anti-Cathari psychological warfare." The alien's shell began to change color, cycling through shades that Tae-min had learned indicated extreme stress and fear. "You're lying," Vestan whispered. "Am I?" Tae-min asked. "Then why am I still sane after 3 weeks in your breaking chamber? Why am I getting stronger instead of weaker? Why are your own people starting to doubt your abilities?" Around the room, the other aliens began backing away from Vestan. Their greatest interrogator, the one who had never failed, was beginning to crack under pressure from a human prisoner, and Tae-min was just getting started. By the 4th week, whispers followed Vestan wherever it went in the facility. The other Cathari no longer looked at the Warcast interrogator with respect. Instead, their eyes held something Vestan had never seen before: doubt. The problem was simple but devastating. No prisoner had ever lasted this long in the breaking chambers. Captain Lee Tae-min should have been a drooling, broken shell of a human by now. Instead, he seemed to grow more confident with each passing day. Tae-min had spent the time well. He now understood the alien social structure better than most Cathari understood it themselves. Their society was built on the idea that everyone had a fixed place. Workers were born workers. Warriors were born warriors. And interrogators like Vestan were born to break minds. But what happened when an interrogator could not break a mind? In Cathari society, that was impossible. It simply did not happen. So when it did happen, no one knew how to react. "Tell me about caste fall," Tae-min said during one session, his voice casual despite the neural disruptor attached to his head. Vestan's entire body went rigid. "What did you say?" "Caste fall. It's when someone loses their position in your society, isn't it? When they fail so badly that they drop to a lower caste. I've been listening to the whispers in the corridors. Your people are starting to wonder if you're still worthy of the war caste." The alien's breathing became rapid and shallow. Caste fall was the greatest fear of any Cathari. To lose one's position was worse than death. It meant becoming nothing, having no identity, no purpose, no worth. "I have not failed," Vestan insisted, but its voice shook. "You will break. All prisoners break." "Of course they do," Tae-min agreed pleasantly. "But I'm still here, aren't I? Still talking, still thinking, still asking uncomfortable questions. How long before your superiors decide you're not the great interrogator everyone thought you were?" Kevron, the young alien who assisted in the sessions, made a small whimpering sound. The poor creature had been showing signs of severe stress for days. Its shell had lost much of its color, and it flinched whenever anyone spoke to it. Taemin had been working on Kevran carefully, systematically undermining the young alien's confidence. It was easy, because Kevran was already terrified of failing in its training. "Kevran," Taemin said gently, "you look tired. How long have you been trying to break me now?" 26 days, Kevran whispered without thinking. 26 days, Taemin repeated thoughtfully. That's nearly a month. In human military training, we have a saying, if you can't solve a problem in a month, maybe you're not qualified to solve it at all. Kevran made that whimpering sound again. Its breathing became even more rapid. "Stop talking to it," Vestan ordered, but there was desperation in its voice now. "Why?" Taemin asked. "Are you afraid of what I might say? Are you afraid that Kevran might start thinking for itself instead of blindly following your methods?" He turned his attention to the young alien. "Tell me, Kevran, what happens to Warcast trainees who cannot master their lessons? What happens to students who fail to break their first prisoner?" Kevran's shell began cycling through colors rapidly, a sign of extreme emotional distress. I will not fail. I cannot fail." "But you already have failed," Taemin said softly. "You've been trying to break me for nearly a month, and I'm still here. I'm still sane. I'm still talking to you as an equal. What does that say about your abilities?" "Silence," Vestan screamed, activating every torture device at once. Pain exploded through Taemin's body like fire, but he had learned to flow around. Pain. To let it wash over him without drowning him. Through the agony, he kept talking. "You see how desperate your teacher has become, Kevran? This is what failure looks like. This is what happens when the Cathari encounter something they cannot control." The pain increased, but so did Taemin's voice. He had trained for this moment. In human psychology, we call this projection. When someone cannot accept their own failure, they blame others. They become angry and violent. They lose control. Kevran was now cowering in the corner, its shell flickering between colors so fast it looked like a strobe light. Other aliens in the room were backing away from Vestan, whose movements had become wild and unpredictable. "Stop!" Kevran suddenly screamed. "Stop the machines! I cannot do this anymore!" The young alien ran to the controls and began shutting down the torture devices. Vestan spun around, fury radiating from its entire body. "What are you doing? You have no authority to stop a session!" "I am failing," Kevran wailed. "I am a failure. I cannot break the human. I am not worthy of the Warcast." The room fell, silent except for Kevran's sobbing. In Cathari society, such an admission was unthinkable. To openly declare oneself a failure was to commit social suicide. Taemin looked around the room at the shocked faces of the alien observers. "This is what happens when you build a society on the illusion of perfection," he said calmly. "Eventually, reality crashes in." Vestan stood frozen, staring at its former student. The implications were devastating. If Kevran was a failure, and Vestan had been training Kevran, then what did that say about Vestan's abilities? "You did this," Vestan whispered, turning back to Taemin. "You corrupted it. You planted poison in its mind." "I told the truth," Taemin replied. "That's all. I told Kevran what was already obvious to everyone in this room. It couldn't break me, which means either it's incompetent or your methods don't work on humans. Either way, your perfect system has a flaw." More aliens fled the room. Word would spread quickly through the facility. The unbreakable human had caused a Warcast trainee to have a complete breakdown. The psychological infection was spreading. Vestan activated a communication device. "Commander Thekvor to Interrogation Chamber 7. Emergency consultation. Required." While they waited for the commander, Taemin continued his work. He spoke to every alien in the room, asking innocent questions that highlighted their growing doubts. "How many prisoners have you personally broken?" he asked one observer. 17, the alien replied automatically, then looked shocked that it had answered. 17 in how long? 3 years. That's about 6 per year. Very efficient, but none of them took longer than a few days, did they? When the alien shook its head, Taemin smiled. So, I'm your first real challenge. How does it feel to discover that your methods might not be as perfect as you thought? The alien backed away without answering, but Taemin could see the fear in its movements. When Commander Thekvor arrived, the room was in chaos. Kevran was still sobbing in the corner. Vexathon was pacing frantically. The other aliens were whispering, among themselves in obvious agitation. The commander was an imposing figure, taller than the others with more elaborate markings on its shell. But Taemin could see uncertainty in its posture too. "Report," Thekvor commanded. "The prisoner has shown unusual resistance," Vexthon began, but Taemin interrupted. "Unusual resistance?" He laughed. "Is that what you call it? Commander, your best interrogator has been trying to break me for 26 days and has failed completely. Not only that, but the stress of failure has caused one of your trainees to have a psychological breakdown." Thekvor looked around the room, taking in the scene. Its gaze lingered on the cowering Kevran, then moved to the obviously distressed Vexthon. "Perhaps," Taemin continued conversationally, "you should ask yourself what this says about Cathari superiority. If you cannot break one human soldier, how can you claim to be the dominant species in the galaxy?" The commander's shell began to darken, a sign of rising anger. But beneath the anger, Taemin could see something else, the first seeds of doubt, taking root in another Cathari mind. "We shall see, human," Thekvor said slowly. "We shall see." But as the commander looked around at its demoralized staff, Taemin could tell that the alien was already wondering if maybe, just maybe, the humans were not as weak as everyone had believed. The psychological war had begun in earnest, and the Cathari were losing. The news of what happened in Interrogation Chamber 7 spread through the facility like a virus. Within hours, every Cathari in the complex knew that a Warcast trainee had suffered a complete psychological breakdown because of a human prisoner. Captain Lee Taemin had become famous among the aliens, but not in the way they had expected. Instead of being known as another broken prisoner, he was becoming known as the human who could not be broken. Worse, he was the human who was breaking them. Commander Thekvor tried to control the damage by restricting access to the interrogation chambers. Only essential personnel were allowed to observe the sessions now. But this only made the whispers grow louder. If the prisoner was truly helpless, why did the commander need to hide him? Kevran had been removed from duty and placed in medical care. The young alien had suffered what human doctors would call a nervous breakdown. It spent its days rocking back and forth, muttering about failure and unworthiness. Other Warcast trainees visited it and came away deeply troubled. Taemin had been studying Cathari psychology for over a month now. He understood their fears, their weaknesses, their blind spots. Most importantly, he understood that their greatest strength was also their greatest weakness, their absolute belief in their own superiority. "Tell me about your home world," Taemin said to Vexthon during one session. The interrogator looked tired and stressed. Its shell had lost its shine, and its movements were jerky and uncertain. "Why do you ask?" Vexthon replied suspiciously. "I'm curious about your society. You've had the same social structure for thousands of years, haven't you? No changes, no adaptations, no evolution." "Our society is perfect," Vexthon said, but its voice lacked conviction. "We have achieved order and efficiency." "Perfect," Taemin repeated thoughtfully. "But perfection means there's no room for improvement, doesn't it? It means you can't adapt when you encounter new situations." He gestured around the chamber. "Like this situation. Your perfect methods don't work on me, but you can't admit that because it would mean your society isn't perfect after all." Vexthon activated the pain amplifiers, but Taemin had grown used to them. The pain was still there, but it felt distant now, like something happening to someone else. "You know what's interesting?" Taemin continued through the pain. "Humans have a saying, the only constant is change. We expect things to change. We prepare for it. We even celebrate it sometimes. Change is chaos," Vexthon muttered. "Order is superior." "Is it? Let me tell you about human history. 1,000 years ago, humans lived in small tribes, fighting each other with stone tools. But we changed. We adapted. We learned. We grew. Now we travel between stars and build civilizations on distant worlds. Taemin paused to let this sink in. What have the Cathari accomplished in the last 1,000 years? You've conquered other species using the same methods your ancestors used. You haven't grown. You haven't evolved. You've just repeated. The alien's breathing became more rapid. Taemin could see that his words were having an effect. Your people conquered dozens of species because they were all weaker than you, Taemin continued. But what happens when you encounter a species that's different? A species that can adapt and change and grow stronger under pressure? Humans are weak, Vestan insisted. But there was desperation in its voice now. Are we? I've been in your breaking chamber for over a month. I've endured everything you can throw at me. I'm still sane, still thinking, still challenging your beliefs. How is that weakness? Other aliens in the room were listening intently. Taemin could see the doubt spreading across their faces like cracks in a dam. Let me tell you something about human psychology, Taemin said, his voice growing stronger. We have a concept called post-traumatic growth. It means that sometimes when we go through terrible experiences, we don't just survive them. We become stronger because of them. He looked directly at each alien in the room. Every day I spend in this chamber, I learn more about your methods. I understand your fears better. I see your weaknesses more clearly. You're not breaking me. You're teaching me how to break you. Vexathon stumbled backward as if physically struck. The implications of Taemin's words were terrifying. If the human was learning their methods, if he was growing stronger instead of weaker, then everything they believed about their superiority was wrong. That's impossible, another alien whispered from the back of the room. Is it? Taemin asked. Then explain why I'm still here. Explain why Kevron had a breakdown. Explain why your best interrogator looks like it hasn't slept in weeks. Commander. Thekvor had been watching from the observation deck above. Now it came down to the main chamber, its heavy footsteps echoing through the room. Enough, the commander said. All personnel except essential staff will leave immediately. The room cleared quickly, leaving only Thekvor, Vexthon, and 2 guards with Taemin. You have caused considerable disruption to my facility, Thekvor said, studying the human prisoner carefully. I've done nothing but answer questions and tell the truth, Taemin replied. If that causes disruption, maybe the problem isn't with me. The commander circled the chair slowly, like a predator studying its prey. But Taemin could see uncertainty in its movements, too. What is your real purpose here, human? This was supposed to be a simple reconnaissance mission, but you surrendered too easily. You endure our methods too well. You know too much about our psychology. Taemin smiled. You want the truth, Commander? I volunteered for this mission. When our intelligence services learned about your breaking chambers, Dr. Park So-young asked for volunteers to test her new training methods against Cathari interrogation techniques. Both aliens went completely still. I'm not just a prisoner, Taemin continued. I'm a field test. Everything that happens to me here is being recorded and analyzed. My resistance techniques, your methods, the psychological profiles I'm building of your species, it's all data that will be used to train other human soldiers. Thekvor's shell began changing colors rapidly. You're lying. Am I? Then how do you explain my resistance? How do you explain my knowledge of your social structure? How do you explain the fact that I'm turning your own people against each other without lifting a finger? The commander looked at Vexthon, who was now visibly shaking. The interrogator's confidence had been completely shattered. Sir, Vexthon whispered, what if the human is telling the truth? What if this was all planned? Then we are in serious trouble, Thekvor replied grimly. Taemin watched the 2 aliens with satisfaction. He had successfully introduced the idea that humanity was more advanced and cunning than they had believed. The seed of doubt had become a growing plant of fear. There's something else you should consider, Taemin said casually. If I'm here as a test subject, what do you think my people will do when I don't report back on schedule? The aliens exchanged worried glances. They were beginning to understand that they might have walked into a trap. My colleagues Kim Dong-wook and Yoon Hai-ri are probably already looking for me, Taemin continued. They have my last known position, my mission parameters, and detailed intelligence about this facility. How long do you think it will take them to find me? We will simply eliminate you, Thekvor said. but its voice lacked conviction. You could, Taemin agreed, but then you'd never know what other surprises humanity has in store for you. And your superiors would want to know why you killed such a valuable source of intelligence before extracting everything from me. The commander was trapped, and it knew it. Killing the prisoner would be seen as an admission of failure, but keeping him was allowing the psychological infection to spread through the facility. What do you want? Thekvor asked finally. I want you to understand something very important, Taemin replied. Humans are not the weak, simple creatures you thought we were. We're adaptable, resilient, and much more dangerous than you realized. We learn from our enemies, we grow stronger under pressure, and we never, ever give up. He leaned forward as much as his restraints would allow. You can torture me for years, Commander, but it won't break me. It will only make me stronger and teach me more about your weaknesses. And every day I resist, every day your people see that their methods don't work. Your society grows weaker. The truth of his words hung in the air like a poison cloud. The Cathari had built their empire on the belief that they were psychologically superior to all other species, but this one human was proving that belief wrong, and the implications were staggering. Thekvor left the chamber without another word, but Taemin could see the fear in its movements. The psychological infection was spreading to the highest levels of command. Soon, the entire Cathari empire would have to face an uncomfortable truth. They were not as superior as they had believed, and humanity was far more dangerous than they had imagined. The facility was falling apart from the inside. 6 weeks had passed since Captain Lee Taemin's capture, and the psychological damage he had inflicted on the Cathari was spreading like a plague. 3 more war-cast trainees had suffered breakdowns after visiting Kevron in the medical wing. The young alien's condition had become worse, and its constant muttering about human superiority was affecting everyone who heard it. Commander Thekvor had called emergency meetings with the facility's senior staff, but the meetings only made things worse. Every discussion about the human prisoner led to arguments about methods, questions about effectiveness, and growing doubts about Cathari psychological warfare techniques. Vestan had aged years in just a few weeks. The once proud interrogator now moved like a broken machine, its confidence completely shattered. It still conducted the daily sessions with time in, but everyone could see that it was going through the motions without any real hope of success. During one session, Taemin decided it was time to reveal the full scope of what he had learned. Vestan, he said gently, I want to thank you. The alien looked up from the control panel it had been staring at without actually seeing. Thank me? You've taught me everything I need to know about your people. Your psychology, your social structure, your fears, your weaknesses. You've given me a complete education in how to defeat the Cathari Empire. Vexathan's shell began to darken with fear. What are you talking about? I wasn't just enduring your torture, Taemin explained. I was studying it. Every technique you used, I analyzed and memorized. Every reaction from your staff, I cataloged and understood. I've been building a complete psychological profile of your entire species. He smiled at the terrified alien. Do you know what I've discovered? The Cathari are incredibly vulnerable to psychological warfare when it's applied correctly. Your rigid social structure, your fear of change, your absolute belief in your own superiority. These aren't strengths, they're fatal weaknesses. Vestan stumbled backward, its breathing rapid and shallow. No, that's impossible. Is it? Look around you, Vestan. Look at what's happened to your facility. Look at what's happened to you. I've been in chains for 6 weeks, and yet I've managed to break the minds of multiple aliens without even trying. Taemin gestured to the observation area where other staff members were watching. Do you see the fear in their eyes? Do you see how they whisper about the unbreakable human? Do you see how they question everything they once believed? The alien interrogator collapsed into a chair, its hands shaking. What have you done to us? I've shown you the truth, Taemin replied. I've demonstrated that humans are not the weak creatures you thought we were. We're your equals, and in some ways, we're your superiors. He leaned forward, his voice becoming more intense. You want to know the real difference between humans and Cathari? You see failure as something to be avoided at all costs. We see failure as something to learn from. You see change as chaos. We see change as opportunity. You see weakness as shameful. We see weakness as a chance to grow stronger. Vestan was now openly sobbing, a sound that chilled every alien in the room. In their society, such displays of emotion were seen as ultimate weakness. "Please," Vestan whispered, "please stop." "Stop what? Stop telling the truth? Stop challenging your beliefs? Stop proving that your perfect society has flaws?" Taemin shook his head. "I can't stop, Vestan. This is who I am. This is what humans do. We push forward, we adapt, we overcome." Commander Thekvor burst into the chamber, its movements wild and desperate. "Enough! This ends now!" "Does it?" Taemin asked calmly. "What are you going to do, Commander? Kill me? That would certainly solve your immediate problem, but what about the bigger issue?" "What bigger issue?" Thekvor demanded. "The issue of how your superiors will react when they learn that your facility failed to break a single human prisoner. The issue of how this news will spread through your empire. The issue of how other conquered species will react when they learn that the mighty Cathari can be psychologically defeated by humans." The commander's shell went through a rapid series of color changes, indicating extreme emotional distress. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" "Think about it logically, Commander. You have a facility full of demoralized staff, multiple psychological casualties, and a complete failure to achieve your primary objective. How do you explain that to your superiors? Without admitting that Cathari methods are flawed, Thekvor looked around the room at its broken staff. The truth of Taemin's words was undeniable. The facility was compromised, possibly beyond repair. "There is another option," the commander said slowly. "Protocol 7. A hush fell over the room. Every alien present knew what Protocol 7 meant. Complete neural restructuring. It was a procedure that would destroy Taemin's mind entirely, reducing him to a mindless shell. "Yes," Taemin said thoughtfully. "That would certainly eliminate me as a threat. But it would also be an admission that your normal methods failed completely. Protocol 7 is supposed to be used only in extreme circumstances, isn't it? Using it on a single human prisoner would raise a lot of questions." The commander hesitated, and Taemin could see the internal struggle playing out on its face. Protocol 7 would solve the immediate problem but create bigger ones. "Besides," Taemin continued, "are you sure your staff is even capable of carrying out the procedure at this point? Look at Vestan. Look at the others. They're emotionally compromised. Their hands are shaking. Do you really trust them to perform a delicate neural operation?" As if to prove his point, Vestan dropped the control device it had been holding. The alien's nervous system was so damaged that it could barely function. "Sir," one of the other aliens spoke up hesitantly, "perhaps we should contact High Command for guidance." "No!" Thekvor snapped. "We will handle this ourselves!" But Taemin could see the panic in the commander's movements. Contacting High Command would mean admitting failure on an unprecedented scale. It would mean explaining how a single human prisoner had psychologically defeated an entire facility. "You're trapped, aren't you?" Taemin observed. "You can't kill me without admitting failure. You can't break me because I'm designed to resist. You can't contact your superiors without revealing your incompetence. And every day this continues, the psychological damage to your staff gets worse." The commander said nothing, but its silence was answer enough. "There's something else you should know," Taemin added casually. "My mission had a deadline. If I don't report in on schedule, my people will assume I've been captured or killed. They'll send a rescue mission." "When?" Thekvor asked in a voice barely above a whisper. "Soon," Taemin replied with a smile. "Very soon." Far above the planet's surface, Major Kim Dong-wook was studying sensor readings from the human scout ship. They had been tracking unusual energy signatures from the Cathari facility for days. The patterns matched what Dr. Park So-young had predicted would happen if the mental fortress protocol was working correctly. "He's still alive," Dong-wook announced to his team. "And from these readings, he's doing exactly what we hoped he would do." Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Hai-ri looked up from her tactical display. "The psychological warfare signatures are off the charts. Whatever Taemin is doing down there, he's causing massive psychological disruption among the aliens. Then it's time to go get him," Dong-wook decided, "and gather as much intelligence as possible about what he's learned." The rescue mission was about to become something much more significant. The first major psychological victory of humanity over the Cathari Empire. Below, in the breaking chamber, Tai Min continued his work. Every word he spoke, every question he asked, every truth he revealed drove the psychological infection deeper into the alien facility. The hunter had become the hunted. The Cathari, who had built their empire on breaking other minds, were discovering what it felt like to have their own minds broken, and this was only the beginning. The rescue mission arrived at dawn, but they found no resistance. The Cathari facility's defense systems were operational, but no one was manning them. The guards at their posts stood like statues, staring at nothing. The entire complex seemed to be in a state of psychological shock. Major Kim Dong-wook led the rescue team through corridors filled with confused and demoralized aliens. None of them even tried to stop the humans. They just watched with empty eyes as the armed soldiers passed by. "This is incredible," whispered Lieutenant Colonel Yoon Hairi into her communicator. "It's like they've given up completely. I've never seen anything like it." They found Captain Lee Taemin in Interrogation Chamber 7, still strapped to the torture chair but very much awake and alert. Around him, several Cathari sat on the floor in various states of mental breakdown. Some were rocking back and forth. Others were muttering to themselves in their own language. "Captain," Dong-wook said as he began releasing the restraints, "are you injured?" "Nothing permanent," Taemin replied, stretching his arms as the straps came off. "But I think our alien friends here are going to need some serious psychological treatment." He gestured to Vestan, who was curled up in a corner making small whimpering sounds. "That's their best interrogator. Or was. I'm not sure it even remembers its own name anymore." Commander Thekvor was found in its office, staring at a wall covered with reports and psychological evaluation charts. When the humans entered, it didn't even look up. "Commander," Hairi said in the few words of Cathari language she knew, "you are now our prisoner." Thekvor slowly turned its head toward her. Its eyes were completely vacant. "Prisoner?" it repeated, in broken human language. "What is prisoner? What is anything?" The psychological damage was so severe that the alien could barely form coherent thoughts. Its entire worldview had been so thoroughly destroyed that it was struggling with basic concepts. "Sir," one of the rescue team members reported, "we've found 17 Cathari in the medical bay. They appear to be catatonic. The facility's medical staff say they suffered complete psychological breakdowns over the past few weeks." Taemin nodded grimly. "They were all part of the interrogation teams. When they couldn't break me, they started breaking themselves. Their rigid mental structure couldn't handle the contradiction between their beliefs and reality. As they moved through the facility, the extent of the psychological devastation became clear. Nearly half the staff was in some form of mental distress. The Cathari social structure depended on everyone knowing their place and fulfilling their role. When that system failed, many of them simply couldn't function. In the facility's main computer core, they discovered something even more valuable than intelligence about Cathari military positions. The aliens had recorded everything that happened during Taemin's captivity. Every interrogation session, every psychological technique, every sign of growing doubt and fear among the staff. "This is a goldmine," Hairi said as she copied the data files. "We have complete recordings of how their psychological warfare methods work, and more importantly, how they fail when used against humans." But the real treasure was in Taemin's mind. During the 6 weeks of captivity, he had learned more about Cathari psychology than humanity had discovered in 3 years of war. Their entire civilization is built on the idea that they're mentally superior to everyone else, Taemin explained as they prepared to leave the facility. Take away that belief, and their society collapses. They have no backup plan, no way to adapt, no mental flexibility at all. "How do we use this?" Dong-wook asked. "We turn their own methods against them," Taemin replied. "But instead of trying to break individuals, we target their core beliefs about themselves. We show them that humans are not only equal to them, but superior in the ways that really matter." They loaded the most severely damaged Cathari onto their transport ship. These aliens would become the first subjects for human psychological warfare specialists to study. The irony was perfect. The aliens who had tried to break human minds would now have their own minds studied and analyzed. Kevran was among the prisoners, still muttering about failure and unworthiness. When Dr. Park So-young met them at the human base, she was amazed by the extent of the psychological damage. I expected the mental fortress protocol to work, she told Taemin, but I never imagined it would be this effective. You didn't just resist their methods. You turned them into weapons against themselves. It wasn't hard, Taemin admitted. Once I understood their psychology, they were incredibly predictable. They see the universe in terms of rigid hierarchies and fixed roles. When you challenge those beliefs, their entire mental framework starts to collapse. Word of the facility's capture spread quickly through both human and Cathari forces. For humans, it was proof that their enemy could be defeated. For the Cathari, it was a disaster that shook the foundations of their empire. The psychological warfare recordings were distributed to every human military unit. Within months, human soldiers were using refined versions of Taemin's techniques against Cathari forces across the galaxy. The results were devastating. Cathari military units began surrendering without fighting when they encountered humans. The aliens' confidence in their own superiority had been so thoroughly undermined that many of them could no longer function effectively in combat. Other species that had been conquered by the Cathari began to rebel. If humans could psychologically defeat the mighty Cathari, then maybe the Empire wasn't as strong as it appeared. Uprisings broke out on dozens of worlds. Commander Thekvor eventually recovered enough mental function to speak. But it was never the same. In its first interview with human interrogators, it made a statement that was recorded and broadcast throughout the galaxy. We thought we were the masters of the mind, the broken alien said. We believed we could break any species, control any psychology, but humans are different. They grow stronger when you try to break them. They learn from pain instead of surrendering to it. They are superior to us. The confession sent shockwaves through the Cathari Empire. If their own commanders admitted human superiority, how could ordinary Cathari maintain their belief in their own dominance? Vestan never recovered. The once proud interrogator spent the rest of its life in a human medical facility, being cared for by the same species it had tried to destroy. The irony was not lost on anyone. Dr. Park So-young established a new department dedicated to psychological warfare against rigid hierarchical societies. Her techniques, refined through study of the Cathari prisoners, proved effective against several other hostile alien species. The key insight, she wrote in her final report, is that species which build their identity on assumed superiority are incredibly vulnerable to psychological attacks that challenge that assumption. Humans, having evolved in competitive environments, with frequent changes and challenges, are naturally resistant to this kind of psychological warfare. Our adaptability, which other species see as weakness, is actually our greatest strength. The war with the Cathari officially ended 2 years later when their government collapsed under the weight of internal rebellions and psychological warfare campaigns. The empire that had dominated dozens of star systems for thousands of years crumbled in less than 3 years once humans learned how to attack their minds instead of just their bodies. Captain Lee Taemin was promoted to colonel and put in charge of the new psychological warfare division. His techniques were studied and taught to soldiers throughout human space. The man who had been captured as a test subject became the architect of humanity's psychological dominance over its enemies. The breaking chamber where Taemin had spent 6 weeks was converted into a memorial. A plaque on the wall read, "Here, the hunter became the hunted. Here, the strong discovered they were weak. Here, humanity proved that the mind, not the body, is the ultimate battlefield." Visitors to the memorial often remarked on the small museum attached to it, where recordings of Taemin's interrogation sessions played on a continuous loop. The recordings showed not the breaking of a human prisoner, but the psychological destruction of an entire alien empire. The Cathari had tried to break a human captive. Instead, they found themselves in chains. Not physical chains, but the far stronger chains of broken confidence, shattered beliefs, and psychological defeat. And in the end, that was the most human thing of all, turning what was meant to destroy them into the very tool of their victory. The galaxy learned a new lesson that day. When you try to break a human, you had better make sure you succeed completely. Because if you fail, if you leave even a spark of human determination alive, that spark will grow into a fire that will consume everything you thought you knew about strength, superiority, and the power of the mind. The aliens had discovered, too late, that humans were not the weak creatures they appeared to be. They were something far more dangerous. A species that grew stronger under pressure, learned from pain, and never, ever gave up. And that made all the difference in the galaxy.